excited to welcome her. We wanted to bring her to Colorado Springs, but maybe in the future we'll do that. Before I introduce her, I want to thank Prologue sponsors, the Department of Visual and Performing Arts, TheaterWorks, the Chancellor's Office, and the College of Letters, Arts, and Sciences Dean's Office. And of course, all of you supporters who've come for 10 years now to see our prologues, to be part of these conversations, these banquets, these workshops, and more. So without further ado, I want to spend most of this time allowing the students to talk to Rachel Chavkin, who is our prologue guest this week. We're going to talk to Rachel about her career, but you may know her as the director of Natasha Pierre and the Great Comet of 1812, and more recently, the hit musical on Broadway, Hadestown, where she won, and I guess is the reigning champion. It was last year, right? You won the Tony Award,
Yes,
the Tony Award for Best Directing of a musical. So I just want to welcome Rachel Chavkin to the talk. Thank you so much for joining us.
it's a pleasure. Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Now you're in New York City, I take it?
I am. I'm in
what
Brooklyn.
looks like a beautiful sunny day.
It's gorgeous out. Yeah, it was really crappy on Monday, but today is lovely.
Well, thank you for being with us. As I said, I'm going to just sort of get the conversation started with some basic questions and then turn over sort of the specifics to the students. And so I thought the basic of all questions is, how did you get involved in theater and directing? Most of the students involved in this conversation are directing students. What are some of those first memories of being drawn to this as a profession?
Yeah, so I grew up in Washington, D.C. Both my folks are not artists. They're both lawyers and both civil rights lawyers, more specifically. Focused in various areas, but a lot of policies, specifically Medicaid policies. So focus on health coverage and civil rights insofar as it kind of comes to people living in poverty. And they also love arts. And in particular, my father loves the theater. And so I grew up getting taken to the theater with a particularly strong bent towards the theater and art in general as a vital wing of social justice movements. And so like I can remember seeing the Three Penny Opera in like a national tour starring Sting when I was a little girl, and that memory in particular, actually, to the other part of the question you asked of like what drew me in, that memory I focus on particularly because I can remember we were sat quite close but very far to the side, and I can remember watching the opening singer, the organ grinder, sing the song of Mac the Knife and his spit flying all over the audience and being absolutely magnetized by this shower of spittle, and that was live, that was what that meant, and I loved it. And at another point in that show, the character dropped his pocket watch and another character picked it up and gave it back to him, and the actor just said, "Thank you, sir," or something. And my dad leaned over to me and whispered in my ear, "That wasn't supposed to happen." And equally, I thought that liveness and chaos, capacity for chaos, I found really moving. And I was always bossy. So ultimately, the love for theater became fused with a love for bossiness. And that was, I think, how I ended up directing today. Maybe that is familiar to some of the students on this call.
Well, yeah, we're all directors here, so I think the bossiness we all kind of get. That's a wonderful answer. I wonder if I could fast forward to the last few years. Obviously, there's a lot of work that will fill in the gaps in our conversation, but with a show like Great Comet or Hadestown, these enormous pieces, obviously they go to Broadway, though they don't start there. One of the things that strikes me in looking at the aesthetic is how transformative the worlds that you create are. And I wonder if you might say a little bit about the relationship between director and designer, and that sort of a relationship, because for those who haven't seen, Great Comet takes place, I mean, the whole theater is utterly transformed to essentially a Russian vodka bar, and Hadestown takes place in the underworld. How do you work with your designers to create these worlds?
Yeah, well, and of course, Hadestown starts in the above ground world, and then we take you to the underground, and I mean, they're fun. It's fun to look at both of those shows in response to the word you use, transformable, because of course, Great Comet, the set featured no transformation whatsoever over the duration of the performance, but obviously we had done this vast amount of transformation to the theater going into the show. So you
Mhm.
walked into sort of an the Imperial Theater was hopefully rendered fairly unrecognizable. Um, and then Hadestown, that's definitely not the case. You know, audiences sit in seats where they're supposed to sit, and there's a stage. But over the course of the show, there is not to give anything away, but there is a massive scenic transformation. And um, uh, to the primary part of the question in terms of designer collaboration, I would say that working with designers is my closest collaboration. And I love actors and I work very intensely with them. But the bulk of my process is actually the pre-production process, in terms of hours spent. And I try to go into any process. I mean, from day one of design meetings, I tend to do a vast amount of preparation, both time with the script and then um, intense amounts of research. And the way that research tends to look is obviously some historical research, if that's relevant or what, but really the bulk of my research is image research. And I sometimes use Google image search, certainly. Certainly right now I am, because that's the main tool at my disposal in COVID times. But I actually don't like Google image search for this, because the algorithm is too good.
Mhm.
And so it sort of only gives you back what you put into it. So instead, sometimes I go to bookstores like the Strand, and I'll like just walk around the art section and sort of look at different photo essays or artist books, and I'll write down the name of that artist, then search for more of that person's work if it feels like it resonates with the musical or play I'm researching. But my favorite place to go is the New York Public Library, to a place they have called the Picture Collection. That is this vast, vast room of pictures. And the librarians who work there, some of them have been working there as long as I've been in New York. So since 1998, over 20 years. And they know their they know their territory. And so you can go up to them and say, I'm looking for images of witchcraft. And you know, the librarian will say, okay, so we have a witchcraft folder, it's under this. But also, you know what, we have a very macabre folder that's called the Dead. Now brace yourself, because it is, their images are creepy, but it may have some stuff you're looking for. And then also we have a voodoo folder, and so they write down the voodoo. So they just begin to point you in all of these different directions. And it means that rather than with the Google algorithm, where it's really a straight line, being in the picture collection and exposed to that much begins to help me think really laterally.
Mhm.
And I do that until I begin to sort of center on a world and on a vibe, spiritually, for the world of the play that feels hot. And to me, that hotness means it is nice to look at and thematically rich, and then on a very prosaic level can function the way I need that play or musical to function. So for example, I'm working on a show Lempicka right now. We have to go from a Russian nightclub, I'm sorry, the Russian Revolution, to Paris in the span of like 4 bars of music. It's so fast and it's so sweeping in telling the story of the life of Tamara de Lempicka. And so one of the first things I said to Ricardo Hernandez, the set designer, was I think everything's got to roll. And I think the image that I'm thinking about is sort of like old time movie sets, which feels like it's in line with how Tamara viewed her life. And she actually lived for many years in Hollywood and California. And so there was a lot that made it what I referred to as hot. And that's where I begin the collaboration with the designer, because there's, of course, countless productions of any play. That's why we keep doing the classics over and over again. So it's not, I don't begin with, you know, X designer, what do you think of this play? Because, you know, my job as the director is to shape what the production is. And so I start with basically what I have called a vomit onto my collaborators of everything that I think or know about this production. And that's where we begin. And there's actually you know, worlds of stuff to figure out from that point. So I truly think that collaboration sometimes gets mistaken as not having or sublimating your ideas to make space for others. And to me, it's the opposite. It's starting with some very strong opinions, particularly if you're the director, and then having all of your phalanges and your heart open to what your collaborators are going to say. And at the end of the day, I work with collaborators because I trust their taste. So I'm going to listen to them.
Yeah. Thank you. And I want to just welcome to the call, just for our viewers to know, Scott Levy, the Artistic Director of the Fine Arts Center Theater Company, Caitlin Lowens, the Artistic Director of Theater Works is with us, Max Schulman, my colleague in the department, and several of our, as I said, our finest directing students. So I'm going to start looking over to the side for your hands raising, and I'll go to you. While we're waiting for that, I wonder, Rachel, if you could just, because you've become, I think, a mentor for someone to look up to for all of us, really, directors, especially with the extraordinary work you've done so publicly recently. I wonder if you might be able to tell us a couple of your mentors or the people whose work really sort of transformed your life.
Yeah, oh my gosh. I mean, Julie Taymor's work was very impactful for me, and very threatening, or unnerving to me, I should say, as a young director, because I was like, I'm never going to make a picture like Julie, which I still feel. I am just so consistently blown away by her visual artistry. Elizabeth LeCompte and the Wooster Group were very important, remain very important to me. John Collins and Elevator Repair Service, Radio Hole, their work, if you don't know, a wonderful experimental theater company based in Brooklyn. The ballets of William Forsythe were very impactful for me when I first saw them, and I would still seek out anything with the Ballet Frankfurt or William's work today, and an associate of his, Crystal Pite, for choreography now. And then, yeah, there's, I mean, Anne Bogart and the work of the City Company and Viewpoints was very impactful to me in college when I first encountered it. And maybe the last person I would say is Marlene Pennison, who was a teacher of mine at Playwrights Horizons, where I first met Scott, within NYU's Tisch School of the Arts. And Marlene taught a class that was on Sunday nights from 7 to 10 p.m. when I first encountered it, and it was called COW, which stood for Creating Original Work. And Marlene was an experimental dancer and choreographer from like the Judson Church heyday of postmodern dance. And she didn't take attendance. You didn't get graded. If you came to class, you were encouraged to bring snacks. And the only assignment for the entire semester that she gave was to be interesting alone on stage for 10 minutes. And she did not help you. She did not tell you what interesting is. She just sat beside you as you writhed in the agony of your own process or lack thereof.
Is that as terrifying as it sounds?
Yeah, and that was the point, right? Is she wanted you to figure out for yourself a way to make. And you could take the class as many times as you wanted because you sort of got better at the making. But you know, that what else is creating your own work at a certain point other than make something interesting on stage for 10 minutes and then 30 minutes and then an hour or 2.5 hours. So it was it was the most wonderful class, and that was profoundly formative on my evolution.
So to our virtual audience, I see Jamie, you have your hand up. You want to go ahead and start and unmute yourself and take it away.
Hello. Hi, Rachel. Nice to meet you. Thank you for meeting with us. I'm very excited to be here, and I'm a little nervous. But one of the questions that I had is, so I agree with what you said when you were talking about like what got you into being like going to be a director and like what motivated you. And I very much feel like I connect with the bossiness as well. And I wanted to ask, when doing a show like The Great Comet, and there's so much left open because you do break away from like the, I don't want to say standard, but like the whole theater setup of like audience and stage and that like that wall and that barrier. What are like some fears or like some like factors that you had to consider that are like, wow, this is like something that the actors and the set and something that was just so open to be manipulated, not just by cast and crew, but by the audience? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's sort of two parts to that answer. One is the kind of more boring logistical part, which is audience members absolutely touched everything. And so we had to like figure out and set up protocols for either restoring props or preventing them from screwing up props. There were 4 stage managers on that show to help control the space and keep an eye on actor safety. There were like protocols in place for if an audience member spilled a drink, how it would get mopped up. So there was all that. I think the more interesting artistic aspect, and then Jamie, you'll tell me if there's like follow-up questions that you have about this, is what I referred to throughout the rehearsal process and working on that show, starting at Ars Nova and all the way to Broadway, is the idea of good touch, bad touch. And what I'm referring to specifically is good touch, bad touch between performer and audience member. And what I have experienced as what I would label bad touch when I am an audience member is when performers and a production insist on telling me that my reality is false. And what I mean by this, you are not Rachel anymore. You are, in fact, a inmate in this asylum, and you're gonna sit over there like a bad inmate in this asylum, but you still want me to behave like an audience member while I watch the story of these other inmates. If we were in it like a immersive production, we're outside or something. That to me never feels good because it denies my reality, which is I came to the theater on whatever night feeling X way, I wore whatever I wore, and I am who I am. I have very occasionally certainly signed up for experiences where I knew exactly what I was signing up for, which involved a degree of self-transformation. So that's not really what I'm talking about. I'm talking about 360-degree sort of worlds like Comet was that keep lying to me as if it's true. With Great Comet, we lied nonstop, but we lied with what I would call an open hand. And that I find deeply pleasurable. So let me make that a little bit more clear. So, so the easiest example, which is sort of towards the end of the play that I can point to, is Pierre sings the lyric, I put on my coat and I step into my sleigh. So we didn't have a sleigh on stage. There was no room for a sleigh on stage. What in fact the original Pierre, Dave Malloy, and ultimately the Broadway Pierre, Josh Groban, did was say, I put on my coat, and we actually did have him put on a coat, and I get into my sleigh. He just slowly walked up a set of stairs to move into another space. And so it was very clear, right? We weren't trying to pretend we're miming a slayer, etc. What we were doing was, for me, taking the emotional truth of the thing, which is he's moving into a different space. He's moving into solo space. And the performer genuinely executed it. The other example that I can point to is when we were first doing the show at Ars Nova, Jason Egan, the artistic director of Ars Nova, who was a thrilling producer and artistic director helping to shepherd this new show, he early on was like, so are the actors, because we were going to do this dumpling and vodka thing, and he was like, so are the actors waiters in the Russian supper club, and then when the show begins, they become the characters? And I was like, no, they're the actors. They're wearing costumes. They can say hi, like Amber Gray, who was with that show the entire time and now is in Hadestown. Amber would say hi to her friends as, you know, if she knew people in the audience, as would anyone in the show if they wanted to, and say hello as Amber and gossip and stuff during the pre-show. And then when the show came time, she might even still like wink or show that she was still present, but she would also then play the character, which goes back to from the stance of the fiction where she was in character, she was in costume when she needed to act. She was fully lived, but she didn't need the audience member to pretend they were in Russia in 1812. Does that all make sense, Jamie?
That makes perfect sense. And I think that's really, really interesting because it's so, I don't know, I think it's so unique of not, it's a nice mixture between actor, character, show, not show, audience, and everything. And I think you did a very, very nice job portraying that and even explaining it to me again. So thank you very much.
Thanks.
I'm going to turn it over to AJ. AJ, you have a question. You got your mic on there? Good.
Yes. Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes, totally.
Awesome. So I watched your documentary about Mission Drift and the devised theater and that stuff that you do with the team. So my question is, you workshop some of that production about capitalism and American history in like Edinburgh and London. So my question, I guess, is I'm interested in learning more about what that experience was, workshopping something that might be a little bit more controversial in other countries.
Oh, well, so the team got its start in Edinburgh in 2005 at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. And the team has always been more easily loved abroad than at home. And I think that's because we are looking at America and often critically, which isn't to say, like, you know, most critics who are reviewing the show, like most theater artists, are coming from a progressive standpoint. So it's not like there's a nationalist defense of America, but I think people tend to have a lot more associations, obviously, if you're looking at something about your own country. And so we've had tremendous successes in New York and nationally here at home in America, but there's also been some more thorny receptions. Whereas abroad, actually, there's such an appetite for work about America by Americans because American culture is so globally dominant, you know, and this special relationship, to use neoliberal Tony Blair's language, is real between the United States and the United Kingdom, in terms of we forge so much policy there, for better and very much for worse. And so actually, like, to your question, the works weren't they were positively controversial, I guess is what I would say. They blew up and were really, really energetically received by audiences over there. Yeah, so I love working in the UK and have spent a lot of time both with the team and as a freelance artist there.
Rachel, just as a tag on to AG's question, would you say a little bit about your company and how that develops for our audience who might not know more about that?
Totally. So the team is my company, or I am a member of the team is the better way to put it, because the team is first and foremost a collaborative ensemble, of which I am the artistic director, but the team is sort of noteworthy because we write all of our plays together and edit them through a consensus-driven editing process. I have very proudly described the team's work as aggressively inefficient, and that is a badge we wear with pride. And the mission of the company, which I sort of alluded to in answering AJ, is to make work about America. And very often that involves taking elements, storylines, characters from American history and American mythology and sort of crashing them into storylines that are reckoning with present day America. So for example, we're making a work called Reconstruction, Still Working, But the Devil Might Be Inside, about race right now, and how to, and if it's even possible, and should we be striving towards intimacy, in particular between a white person and a Black person in an anti-Black country, which certainly I think we can acknowledge America is. So the work is often very much struggling with the current moment and how we got here. That's the obsession. And what AJ was alluding to is there was a documentary called The Team Makes a Play by the wonderful Emmy Award winner Paulette Douglas, who has sadly now passed. But she did a beautiful job making a documentary that followed about 5 years of making a show called Mission Drift that we made about late stage capitalism and Las Vegas. And it's great. And we've been streaming it for free during the COVID crisis, as well as one of our more recent works, Primer for a Failed Superpower, which is a concert that featured a cover band of 32 teenagers, 30-somethings, and people 16 up.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm looking at, I think, Scott. Do you have a question, Scott?
Yeah, it's probably multi-pronged. Rachel, you should know that my students this semester, their textbook is Mary Robinson's book.
Amazing.
Yeah, directing plays, directing people. And I wonder if there are any nuggets beyond Marlene's class from your training that you've taken with you that you're still utilizing. So that's sort of like my first question. And then the second question is, do you feel like you have an artistic home is it the team? And if not, is it something else? And is there a fundamental difference between the work you do that ends up being commercially viable versus the other work that, well, I'm not saying it's not commercially viable, but you know what I'm saying, that sort of difference between
Yeah, those are
uptown and downtown.
Yeah, they're great big questions. Let me answer the second one first, because I might lose that thread more easily. So it's a great question. The team is a home for me. I would also define New York Theater Workshop as a home for me. I have made 3 shows there since 2010. I did 3 pianos there in that year. And then I did Hadestown, of course, in 2016 and developed it with New York Theater Workshop starting in 2014. I did Carol Churchill's Light Shining in Buckinghamshire in 2018. And so that, and now I am very honored to serve as an artist on the board of the workshop. So that is a real home for me. And Hadestown is a home, and Great Comet was a home. I think there's sort of like, I tend to approach everything I work on as building a family. And so to that end, what I would say is to the second part of this big question, I used to think that the team was where I did my work. And that's the role that I thought it would play in my life. Actually, in many ways now, it's the opposite, because the team, because it's strives for horizontality, because it's a collaborative, it's a place where I actually have to subjugate, to a certain extent, my opinions, drive, etc., to make space for the leadership of others and the input of others, which can be exhausting, frankly. There are rewards for it, not in the least, the fact that it is the place where I get to live my politics most thoroughly. And to be more specific about that, it's the place where I get to be 100% committed to the idea of democracy in action and egalitarianism. And I love that. And the team producerially strives for that as well in terms of living our values. During Reconstruction, we have spent, during each period of development that we've had for Reconstruction, we've spent hours as a collective reading through our collaboration contract so that everyone knows and can speak to and wrestle with and question and edit the rules that govern their work. So the team serves that function for me. But in terms of my artistic life, my freelance life is actually much more free. And because I just get to be the boss, you know, for better and for worse, but it is more efficient, and it is, can feel more like my artistic work alone. And to that end, in terms of the downtown uptown, working with the team is unlike any freelance room I'm in. But every freelance room I'm in, I do not draw a distinction between the downtown and the uptown. And in fact, I don't think it's my job to decide what is commercially viable and what is not commercially viable. I think it's just my job to make the best work that I can for the task at the moment. And so for Hadestown, that was New York Theater Workshop, and then it was Canada, and then it was London, and then it was Broadway. In terms of the first question you asked of like from education, What do I hold on to? I mean, there's so much from my training that I think about. Michael Krass was my very treasured first year design teacher, and was very impactful for me, and in fact is the costume designer on Hadestown, so has remained a profoundly treasured colleague. And Michael, of course, was very interested in three things, always, though that was the refrain of the class. What do you see? How does it make you feel? How did they do that? And I always thought those are brilliant ways of approaching the learning of a visual aesthetic language, and ways of critiquing what you're seeing without getting too wrapped up in I liked it or I didn't like it, which, you know, can be so boring as a way to talk about it, though taste really matters. I think about Louis Scheeder a huge amount, and what I learned in his Shakespeare class. That was probably, from a text analysis perspective, Louis Scheeder's class was probably the most impactful in terms of my subsequent.
Rachel, I have a question here from Max Schulman. Max, go ahead.
Hi, Rachel. I have to run in a couple of minutes to another Zoom meeting, but which is what we do now. But I wanted to ask, especially because a lot of our students who are in the room with you right now are actors. I wanted to know what you look for in an actor. What excites you about a particular performer as you cast or as you think about putting your people in roles and things like that?
Yeah, there is no one thing. Because fundamentally, I'm in a fortunate position where I don't see bad actors, right? And I don't mean like in a banal way. I mean literally, like they don't come into my audition room because they will have gotten screened by the casting director. So it's I'm never evaluating who is more skilled, well, that's not true. I'm never evaluating sort of at the most fundamental level. What I'm evaluating in an actor is, are they right for this role? And that's going to be different depending on the role and depending on the play. And what I need in an actor and what makes them the right actor for the production, as I thought about it, of Carol Churchill's Light Shining in Buckinghamshire is super different because than what I'm looking for in an actor for Hadestown. First and foremost, they have to sing, they don't have to sing. In Carol Churchill's show, they had to play a number of different characters. So I thought about transformation and capacity for transformation. I also thought about the self. And frankly, that is something that I am very cognizant of as a through line through my work, is wanting someone to bring their full self, whatever that means. And a way of thinking about that is there's a character in Light Shining in Buckinghamshire who is deeply, deeply poor, is homeless, runs afoul of vagrancy laws. The show is set in England during the Revolution, in the Glorious Revolution in the 1600s. And she ends up becoming quite radicalized after being prosecuted for breaking these unjust vagrancy laws. And that is a character that could have gone any number of ways, because poverty exists for everyone, regardless of your race or your cultural upbringing, etc. But what poverty looks like for each person is going to be different depending on their family background, maybe their relationship to immigration, and whether they are first generation or fourth generation. So I will look at that in the audition room and probably talk about it with the actors. And I am interested in someone who either gets the direction I'm giving or can see where I'm pushing because they understand the text in a deep and emotional way. And I think that text analysis is a profoundly valuable skill for an actor. But beyond that, there's not a single thing that I look for.
I think we have a question from Nicole. Nicole, do you have your camera and mic ready to go?
I do have my mic on. Oh, there we go.
There you go.
So through my experience in theater, with learning about it and learning the different types, I've realized that there's more different types of theater than a lot of people realize, like absurdism and American realism. So my question to you is, in your opinion, what is the hardest genre of theater to direct, and why is it so hard?
Oh, I would never say that one genre. I'm not even quite sure that I find genre to be a useful way of thinking about theater beyond an academic setting. Because I want to meet every play as its own event. And I think very often, like, it's not like a playwright is like, I'm going to write a realistic play now, or I'm going to write an absurdist play now. They're going to write the play that feels truthful to them. And I think it's the bargain of a director working on it to agree that you are going to work to figure out how that play wants to live in three-dimensional space, which requires a huge amount of deep listening. And that includes reading to yourself, right? When you're first just reading a play in the privacy of your own home. So, yeah, that's what I would say, is like meeting each play on its own terms, to me, is the most important thing.
I think we have time for 2 or 3 more questions. And I know Ellie, Scott's daughter, has a question.
My almost 15-year-old is sitting over here. She's got a question for you. Ellie Violet.
Hello.
Hi, Ellie.
Hi. I would just like to say first that I'm a very big fan of all your work. I centered my entire 12th grade birthday around the Great Comet. So
Amazing.
So my question is, with how, I guess, big Great Comet and most recently Hadestown has blown up, I guess, in the theater community, when starting a new project, do you like have any self-doubt or feel stressed to make it, I guess, as good as your previous work? And in that sense, what goal do you set for yourself while you step into a new project?
That's a great question, Ellie. I would say I am totally plagued by self-doubt. I mean, and not in a bad way, in a way that is actually my primary asset is challenging myself constantly and going, are you prepared enough? Are you fired up genuinely by this idea? How can this idea be more thorough, more moving, more spectacular, if that's what the show wants, or more rigorous in whatever way? Back to Nicole's question, each show wants a different thing. So of course I don't want to work on anything that feels mediocre. And in fact, I have learned that I will hurt a play or a musical if I don't love it. So I can't work on anything that I don't believe in. It will be bad. It will be a bad collaboration. I will be miserable and I will make others miserable. So to the second part of your question of what goals, my goal is to help the thing, meaning the new play, new musical, whatever it is, be as much itself as it can be, and to like every moment of stage time, or to have enough time in a process to change it until I like it. Those are really my goals. So at the end of the day, I have to trust my own taste. which means I have to keep feeding my taste, which means seeing theater, seeing dance, seeing music, watching movies, going to the museum, reading books. I have to keep improving and deepening and strengthening and making more complex my personal taste so that I don't grow stale. That's part of my job as an artist.
Thank you.
I think AJ has another question. AJ, go ahead.
Hi. So my question is, Tolstoy is like thought to have been very against opera and didn't even really consider it like a true art form. So did that influence any of the decisions you made with The Great Comet? And if so, what were they?
Yeah. So I haven't listened to the album in many moons, so I can't remember quite how this is recorded. But the opera, within the opera, when Natasha and Sonia and Maria D go to the opera, we made very deliberately obscure and off-putting and hopefully quite transcendent. We didn't want to make something just stupid, because honestly, that would feel like wasted stage time. Like, who wants to watch something stupid? But we wanted to make it very, very strange, as a nod to how much Tolstoy disliked opera, because he felt it was too classist, right? So that was very much a choice in step with honoring this aspect of Tolstoy that you think of. And then on the flip side, part of why I wanted Comet to feel so inviting to the audience is both knowing that opera can be really threatening to people, and we wanted to signal, no, you are welcome here. And part of it was also the fact that Tolstoy is scary to people, and War and Peace is scary to people. And again, we wanted people to understand, like, War and Peace is actually one of the funniest books. Like, I can remember some critic said, who did not like the show, said, how could they make War and Peace so irreverent? They don't have any respect for it. And it's like, anyone who thinks that War and Peace doesn't have a sense of humor, I pity you, because it's there in every like line of Tolstoy's language, is the kind of bitter but like biting humor with which he was evaluating all of society, and the high of society and the low of society, and how they live together. And he was interested in that scope. And so we wanted Great Comet to have that heart.
Rachel, if you don't mind, I think we have 3 more quick questions. Do you have time for that?
3 more questions, totally.
Yeah. All right. I see Zach joining us from a land far away. Zach, what's your question?
Hello. I was wondering, just kind of a simple question. If you had unlimited budget, any space to work in, what script would you choose to produce right now to direct?
Well, I mean, actually, the show that I'm supposed to be in rehearsals for right now, which is Lempicka, which is this vast, extraordinary musical about the painter Tamara de Lempicka. And I've never listened to a sing through of the show, or I've gotten to direct one production of it at Williamstown, but it is on a Broadway trajectory now, and it never doesn't make me cry, like just shattering. And it's a work that is about a world in crisis, because it is set in Paris between the world wars and as fascism is rising. And you watch it through the eyes of this woman, Tamara de Lempicka. And I just think the story is extraordinary and so frighteningly potent for now, and resonant for now. So yeah, I would choose that.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
So Caitlin Lowens is joining us. Caitlin, do you have a question?
Sure. So I've never had the privilege of directing something which I anticipate will run over months, the way that your Broadway Brown projects do, or that projects that you've had that have had multiple iterations. So I'm just interested in how you approach the question. I think especially with your actors is like liveness and stretchiness and responsiveness to the moment, because over the course of a several months or years long run, the world that you rehearsed for and the world that your production may be in may be different worlds. And so I'm interested in how you talk to or work with your actors to give them that space to, to find new things, or how you revisit over the
Yeah, there's so many aspects to that beautiful question, Caitlin. So first, in terms of the directing itself, I try to build, so I am at the end of the day, I am a control freak, but I'm only interested in attempting to control genuine chaos, which means equally, I am interested and deeply devoted to mess. So going back to that Threepenny Opera story that I told at the beginning of the call, like the spittle flying over the audience and the actor dropping their pocket watch. Like I do try to build staging that is very demanding and of the actor physically, and a sense of liveness, like, are we going to be able to pull this off? It's the thing I have loved most about the Wooster Group all my life, is watching a Wooster Group show literally does feel like a sporting event. They were just streaming, I don't know if they're still streaming their show, To You the Birdie, at the Wooster Group's website. And that show was super impactful for me. I saw it either while I was in my senior year, right after graduating. And they literally like play these smashing games of badminton through it. So, they're not faking that. It's genuine. So that keeps a show alive every night on a very basic level. That said, I am very concerned with repeatability, particularly on the shows that ultimately are on Broadway, because one of the things I have been struck by learning since I've come to work on Broadway is every single night Hadestown performs, someone is having their first Broadway experience. And frankly, it might be their only Broadway experience of their life or of their year that they've been looking forward to. And that means that show has to be ready, and they have to receive it fully. And on any given night, there's stuff that's happening, like, both someone's under the weather and so their voice is a little bit strained, or someone is out and so an understudy is on. And so making sure that the show is live enough to be still enjoyable. And it's why it's important for me to build joy into any show, exuberance into any show, even if it's about sorry, sad subject material. There has to be a fun element to performing it, I think. But yeah, there's a lot of like consideration of, can this happen at this time, on this bar, with that head turn every single night? And it's actually why I stage things so thoroughly, is because even if an actor is in whatever place on a given night, they've got their technique. And their technique includes executing fully whatever the staging is. And so I tend to think about staging the performance into the show itself, including how Eurydice collapses to her knees going into Flowers. So that I think Eva's like, Eva Noblezada, who plays Eurydice, she's one of the most like astonishing, emotional, athletes I've ever encountered. But also she knows the shape of that sink so that we can track the story of devastation that character is going through, regardless of, if she's having a night where she doesn't feel it maybe as much. Right.
Okay.
So,
Hi,
Nicole,
sorry.
you have a question for us? Yeah.
Yeah, I do. I'm so sorry. I do have one more question. So my favorite genre is horror. I know we were talking about genre before, and theater doesn't really have genres and stuff, but when you're doing a play that has some horror tendencies in it, is there a certain way you approach it, or would you approach it like any other play?
Well, I would do a lot of research on horror, and I am working on a thriller film. Yeah, it's called Shrew's Nest right now, and you can find a little bit more info about it online. It's an American adaptation of a Spanish film, and so doing extensive amount of research into the genre is, would be as horror is sort of its very specific, unique pocket, because it does have so many rules, or not rules, but like kind of tricks. There's things that work, right? And we can hear it in different scores. There are also things that are astonishing because they break it. So like, right, for example, we think of horror films as being defined by creepy scores, musically speaking, that build suspense and build suspense and build suspense. But then you have a piece like Alien, which was almost silent, right? So it's not to say that that you have to live by the rules, but it's helpful to be informed by them.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Rachel Chavkin, thank you so much for joining us, and for joining us in this sort of our digital world that we're living in right now. And I want to thank all the students, Max, Scott, Caitlin, Ellie, everyone else, for being with us, and thank you all, audience, for watching this. We'll continue to put some of these videos online so that you can, even as you're quarantining at home, enjoy thinking about the theater and all the wonderful things we have to come back to. Thank you all very much.